there is a mushrooming of sexual abuse, rape, and sexual assault cases from all parts of the country. This is quite alarming. We want to bring to you what it feels like for a survivor. We're going to lay down the definitions of sexual assault, rape, and sexual abuse, and how it affects an individual. Trauma is not about what happens, but it's about how you perceived it happened. Trauma is not really the action that was perpetuated against the survivor, but it's about how they took that experience. Trauma can live on in the body, in the mind, and in the spirit. Joining me today is Dr. Meghna-Jammy, who is known for her work in this field. She has got an MBBS and an MS. She also has a degree in psychiatry, and she's actively helping a lot of survivors through her clinic, Holistic Mind Clinic. She also has co-authored a book called Mind Sutra with Dr. Shefali Gupta. Her approach to mental health issue is evidence-based, it's multimodal and multidisciplinary. We are so happy and delighted to have you, Dr. Meghna. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jammy, for this platform and the opportunity to talk about something which is very, very close to my heart.
Pleasure. So to start with, I think it would be very helpful to clarify some terminology. We often hear terms like sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, sexual harassment. All these can be very confusing and can be used interchangeably. So could you explain the differences?
Yes, certainly. I think it's very important to know these terminology because a lot of people are not aware. And I feel being aware of what you might be going through is the first step towards seeking help and towards healing and recovery. Sexual harassment is usually implies to any kind of verbal communication or gesture, which is done with a sexual intent.
Okay.
And it is usually, it could be in a public place, it could be in a workplace, and usually it is done. So throughout, you will see that power dynamics is something which plays throughout, right? So it is usually done at a person thinking that they would be powerless to resist it. Okay. So that is sexual harassment. Sexual abuse is a terminology. Sexual abuse is again something which again comes from that power dynamics, and it could be, it is non-consensual, and it could be any kind of sexual act. Usually you would see that in sexual abuse, it is done by somebody who is known to the victim and somebody who the victim trusts. Usually it is done over a prolonged period of time, and certain element of manipulation or coercion is a part of sexual abuse. And it could be done at any age. So like child sexual abuse, right? It could be done by somebody the child trusts, and it would be something that would keep on going on for a long period of time. Sexual assault is, again, there is an element of violence in sexual assault, and it's a much broader terminology. Usually involves groping, or it could also mean, it need not be sometimes physical also. It could be forcing somebody to watch porn against their consent. And rape is a way, it has legal implications. It involves sexual violence or a form of sexual assault in which there is penetration, which could be either oral, anal, or vaginal penetration. And physical violence in rape is usually the most traumatic, it causes a lot of physical violence is the most in rape. The common element which run through all the sexual harassment, abuse, or rape is it is against consent. There is an element of power dynamics involved in it. Usually the victim is seen as somebody who can be subjugated to coercion or manipulation and might not be able to resist, whether it is short-term or long-term. So I feel this is the more psychologically disturbing part of any kind of sexual violence, the power dynamics. The physical wounds, the physical hurt, it heals over a period of time. But the psychological trauma, the victim stays with it for a very, very long time. And I feel it requires an army of support givers, caregivers, to help the survivors find their feet again.
Yes. Just to be clear, although sexual abuse, assault, or rape happens more to women, it also happens to men.
Absolutely. It happens to men, it happens to children, it happens especially in the LGBTQ community. It's very common. I feel it is gender neutral, but for the sake, because women are more commonly associated with it. Maybe in during the course of my conversation, I would be using she more for the victim, just because it's more commonly known reported in women.
Thank you for clarifying that. Each of these behaviors can have a very significant impact on survivors. Can you tell us more about the psychological effects that survivors can experience?
Absolutely. I think the most common element is the shock of it and confusion. Often there is guilt. So I remember, a little bit of self-disclosure here. I remember traveling in a public transport as maybe a eighth grader or a ninth grader. And in the bus, a man who was standing behind me started groping. And in full public view, right? And I'm just a teenager, 13, 14-year-old. And the first reaction is confusion, shock of it. And then I kind of tried to push him behind, but it was a very crowded bus. And he just made it appear as if, it's because it's crowded, he's just, he happens to touch me kind of thing. And then while seeking help, my father was towards the end of the bus because of the crowd. So I tried to kind of reach out to him, couldn't. So I just looked around and tried to reach out to a lady who was sitting. I was standing and the lady was sitting beside. And I just tried to kind of reach out to her, but she chose to look the other way. And when that happens, I think that leaves you with a lot of confusion, becomes manifold. And I feel that leaves you with a lot of guilt and shame. With maybe it was maybe it is not something that you need to, kind of tell people or reach out to. So I think this is pretty common across the spectrum, though I am describing a case of harassment which happened in public place. But I'm sure at workplaces, at whatever the severity or across the spectrum, immediate is just the shock, the guilt, the confusion, the hurt